Greetings, this is Celebration. My name is John Savers and I'm your host. And today we'll continue our little series on diversity. As you recall, diversity is a subject of some topical imperative. The President has spoken in favor of it, many of our political leaders and so forth. So I thought it was worthy of consideration, and I want to say that we at Celebration are emphatically on the good side of diversity. We look forward to a world of global heterogeneity and local homogeneity and local control, which we think serves the best interests of the various peoples of the earth. We are a little bit suspicious of the leadership in this matter of diversity. We think there may be some ulterior motives involved, and that given the players involved, that the Masonic goals of a blended people, a global political apparatus, and a generic religion is really what they are looking forward to. We don't actually look forward to this. We are not opposed to any religion or any people, and we simply wish for everyone to have a room of their own on this good earth. Now, we have, in this particular effort, Celebration, featured information which may offend some or may be thought to be hostile towards some. But we bear no ill will toward anyone. We are simply bringing forth information on the basis that ideas are important. And when ideas are fundamentally different, this should be considered, and the relationship of the peoples that hold those two sets of fundamentally different ideas. We think that it is an oddity that there is such a thing as divorce between men and women who can't get along, but there are not similar arrangements for peoples who cannot get along. We think it's a good idea, actually. We kind of like the idea expressed in the poem by Robert Frost, the farmer, noting that good fences make good neighbors. We kind of like that idea and think it has a good deal of merit. But we do know this: you can't force people with different ideas to get along. It's just not in the cards. So we say this because we want to turn aside as best we can notions that we are hostile toward people, but simply that we note these ideas which in the very nature force opposition between people or among people. So on that basis, I would now like to turn to the area of the relationship of black Americans to the European-derived Americans. It has been said by some, I think very foolishly and wrongly, that I am a person who perhaps looks forward to something like a racial war or some sort of rubbish of this type. But this is not the case. In fact, there is quite a bit of evidence which suggests that a war of a type has been going on since the civil rights movement. In fact, the civil rights movement, rightly perceived, was an inauguration of a kind of civil war with the white population being the target, and that this has been called a dirty war. The casualties have been great, and for those of you who have not considered this matter, I would like to call to your attention a piece written by an Australian journalist noting this very situation. I'd like you to consider it very carefully. The longest war America has ever fought is the Dirty War, and it is not over. It has lasted 30 years so far and claimed more than 25 million victims. It has cost almost as many lives as the Vietnam War. It determined the result of last year's congressional election. Yet the American news media do not want to talk about the dirty war, which remains between the lines and unreported. In fact, to even suggest that the war exists is to be discredited. So let's start suggesting immediately. No matter how crime figures are massaged by those who want to acknowledge or dispute the existence of a dirty war, there is nothing ambiguous about what the official statistics portray. For the past 30 years, a large segment of black America has waged a war of violent retribution against white America. And the problem is getting worse, not better. In the past 20 years, violent crime has increased more than 4 times faster than the population. Young blacks under 18 are more violent than previous generations and are 12 times more likely to be arrested for murder than young whites. Nearly all the following figures, which speak for themselves, have not been reported in America. According to the latest U.S. Department of Justice survey of crime victims, more than 6.6 million violent crimes, murder, rape, assault, and robbery, are committed in the U.S. each year, of which about 20%, or 1.3 million, are interracial crimes. Most victims of race crime, about 90%, are white, according to the survey highlights from 20 years of surveying crime victims published in 1993. Almost 1 million white Americans were murdered, robbed, assaulted, or raped by black Americans in 1992, compared with about 132,000 blacks who were murdered, robbed, assaulted, or raped by whites, according to the same survey. Blacks thus committed 7.5 times more violent interracial crimes than whites, even though the black population is 1/7 the size of the white population. When these figures are adjusted on a per capita basis, they reveal an extraordinary disparity. Blacks are committing more than 50 times the number of violent racial crimes of whites. According to the latest annual report on murder by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, most interracial murders involve black assailants and white victims, with blacks murdering whites at 18 times the rate that whites murder blacks. These breathtaking disparities began to emerge in the mid-1960s when there was a sharp increase in black crime against whites, an upsurge which, not coincidentally, corresponds exactly with the beginning of the modern civil rights movement. Over time, the cumulative effect has been staggering. Justice Department and FBI statistics indicate that between 1964 and 1994, more than 25 million violent interracial crimes were committed, overwhelmingly involving black offenders and white victims, and more than 45,000 people were killed in interracial murders. By comparison, 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam and 34,000 were killed in the Korean War. When nonviolent crimes, burglary, larceny, car theft, and personal theft are included, the cumulative totals become prodigious. The Bureau of Justice Statistics says 27 million nonviolent crimes were committed in the U.S. in 1992, and the survey found that 31% of the robberies involved black offenders and white victims, while only 2% in the reverse. When all the crime figures are calculated, it appears that black Americans have committed at least 170 million crimes against white Americans in the past 30 years. It is the great defining disaster of American life and American ideals since World War II. All these are facts, yet by simply writing this story, by assembling the facts in this way, I would be deemed a racist by the American news media. It prefers to maintain a paternalistic double standard in its coverage of black America, a lower standard. Now, this appeared in the Truth at Last, issue number 384, page 5, citing the Sydney Morning Herald, Saturday, May 20th, 1995, by Paul Sheehan. Now, the information given here by Mr. Sheehan in this article is information which I think many Americans understand from a scuttlebutt or through the grapevine sort of understanding. But the statistics have been covered up, so to speak, by the newspaper, the media, the press, the TV networks, and so forth, since the 60s, when the great rise in black crime against whites occurred. I remember reading statistics in the newspapers back in the late 60s, as I recall, maybe even into the early 70s, in which there were racial identification of crime victims and who perpetrated the crime. But this was discontinued, and I think it was done so for cosmetic reasons. But it simply left people with an uneasy feeling, a feeling of guilt on the one hand for acknowledging the truth, and a feeling of the truth of the matter which had to be acknowledged quietly and to themselves for self-protection. We have many instances where people have been labeled, for instance, as racist for, say, walking across the street to the other side of the street when they saw a group of young blacks coming and so forth. But those who are familiar with this particular war know it's a pretty good strategy, as well as keeping your eye out on the streets and so forth. It's been pointed out that the notion amongst white people of looking down to the ground when they see blacks coming and stuff like this is hardly good strategy, since it simply makes you a better victim. But at any rate, these kinds of things have been going on, and yet throughout the whole business, it has been white people who have been labeled as the malefactors, and it is the doers of the deeds have been sort of whitewashed, if you'll excuse the word, and black society has been given a passing grade as far as behavior patterns go, while white society has been castigated for all sorts of crimes which have really the effect of making good boys go bad. I don't buy that, and I don't think a lot of other people do, at any rate. But we have to understand that this is being perpetrated by rather powerful forces. The press, the media, and so forth did not discontinue listing the racial components in these things without cause, without direction. And the direction came from people who did not want to bring this to light. Now, there can be speculation about why that is, but one thing is for sure, that you can never solve a problem if the problem is not properly understood. We feel that there has been a conscious effort to not understand these problems. Also, we feel that a sort of pincer movement has been inaugurated in the war against the European-derived people, with an economic end on one side, the upper side being waged. We see industries fleeing America, jobs fleeing America. We see a running down of the general wages being paid, a global lowering of the United States standards to a more global standard. And from below, we have seen this initiation of a rather disconcerting, brutal war against the European-derived people. And it has been very effective because most people have been turning their eyes toward this matter of crime rather than the crimes going on in high places in regard to policies which have been set for this country. It is those policies that have been set for this country that are far more dangerous to the everyday citizen than the crimes perpetrated by black villains, and that should be understood. But we feel that they are together. That is, they're pincers, they're forks of a general attack, and I think it should be considered and talked about in those terms. Now, it's not unusual when a society is being toppled for Freemasonry to unleash a reign of terror, and as a strong component thereof, there have always been the widespread use of hoodlums. And this occurred in the French Revolution, and it occurred in all the revolutions that took place in East Europe, and it occurred in the revolution that toppled the Tsar regime in Russia. People do not seem to ever suppose that things of that kind can happen here, but it is precisely that lack of vigilance which makes it a certainty, I think. To be warned is to be forearmed, and of course knowledge is useful in that regard, and we think that the aim in part of the malevolent leadership of this sort of thing has been to remove the facts from the people. And this, in conjunction with a terrifying lowering of standards in the schools and so forth, had the effect of making a less savvy people. But at any rate, let's consider some particular instances of these crimes, because we see often crimes listed where a white will maybe do something terrible against a black person, and justly they should be punished, but the reverse is not very well noted, and certainly not in the way of like CNN News, where a crime committed by a white person against a black is run for days and days and days on end. This has the unfortunate effect of making young blacks suppose that they are primary victims, when in point of fact they are primary victimizers. But at any rate, let's consider a few of these crimes committed against white people, just for the purpose of rounding out the picture. A Negro, Donald Flagg, was on his way to work at the Chrysler plant. He spotted Deborah Puglisi, 46, gardening in her front yard. He later confessed to police, "I saw her, I wanted her." He pulled down the alley behind her house and slipped in an unlocked back door. When Anthony Puglisi, 50, got home, he told his wife he was going to take a nap. Once inside the door, Flagg shot him in the head. A neighbor's lawnmower prevented her from hearing the shot. When Deborah entered the house, Flagg immediately jumped her and raped her. He tied her up and threw her into the trunk of his car and drove to his home. There, he hog-tied the nurse, handcuffing her hands behind her back, then her ankles, and tied the two together. She would now be raped several times a day over the next 4 days. Flagg read the local newspaper to her of the murder of her husband and laughed when she cried. He kept an immaculate yard and took a break to mow the grass. Neighbors said that he smiled and waved while mowing. The next day, Flagg told Deborah he had to get back to his job at Chrysler. He left her on the bed hog-tied. Knowing that death was imminent, she spent 4 hours working to free the rope between the pair of handcuffs. Then she hopped to the phone and with her hands still behind her back dialed 911. Her cry for help to the police is on this page. Flagg later confessed and told the police, "I don't even know the Puglisi family. It was just a random act." This, in fact, means that no one is safe. Deborah Puglisi is a mother of 19-year-old twins, Melissa and Mike, who were both track stars at St. Mark's Catholic School. Their father, Anthony, was once a popular singer and saxophone player in the band Encore. The lives of this family will never be the same again. The national media has totally ignored such horror stories. They had rather concentrated on an isolated incident in Jasper, Texas, as if it were a common event. The thousands of true-life murders of whites by blacks are never, ever reported by the national media. This is from The Truth at Last, issue number 406, page 4. Now, I would like to say, in regard to this particular crime, that the person involved had a very good job. He worked for Chrysler. This is one of the best-paying labor types of jobs. He's not a courier or a subsistence worker. He's not somebody struggling in that regard. He has a house, apparently respected by his neighbors. If you ask his neighbors, they probably say, well, he's a fine fellow. He has a very nice smile. He always has nice comments to make, good jokes to tell, and so forth like this, a fine fellow. He seems to be doing okay. He has a nice car, apparently, driving to work, and yet he demonstrates this almost spontaneous, random lack of control, this lack of discipline. It suggests to me that there may be something here that is structural, some sort of inability to control. Many times I've seen stories, even seen on film, tales of what surely started out as just a robbery, say 7-Eleven or something of this kind, but which quickly and for no apparent reason escalated into a murder or a shooting. And we think that there is something structural here that causes a kind of emotional bender, a ratcheting up here that totally obliterates discipline and control that to be found in that should be found, I think, in a citizen's mind. But at any rate, I would like to give you another instance of this particular crime wave, so please attend. Another story along this vein, Dallas, Georgia. 5 black athletes at Paulding County High have been indicted for the gang rape of a 14-year-old white girl. Despite the seriousness of the charges, all were welcomed back to Paulding High as they were star athletes. While liberals were bemoaning the plight of these poor, misunderstood kids, 4 of them were indicted again in the rape of 2 more 14-year-old girls over the past 5 months. This is from The Truth at Last, issue 406, page 5. And still another instance of crime which I'll call to your attention, I hope you will consider. St. Louis, Missouri. We have read reports of brutal crimes, and this is one of the worst. A Negro, Michael Taylor, 16, attended McClure North High. Christine Smetzer, 15, was alone in the school restroom when Taylor broke into her stall. He struck her in the face and then forced her head down into the toilet. While she was drowning, he raped her. During his sentencing for murder, Judge Larry Kendrick told him that he had escaped the death penalty by 48 days, the number of days before his 16th birthday. This is from The Truth at Last, issue number 406, page 8. Well, now, there are many other instances of this kind, and perhaps we will give you a few more incidents to personalize and to make the deal more real to you in the next couple of programs. But we do want to call this to your attention because we know that President Clinton is not going to call, say, the Puglisi children and tell them that he feels their pain. And we certainly can tell you the networks and the major newspapers are not about to run large stories of publicity about this sort of matter. But at any rate, we would like to give you another episode, another personal incident to, again, give you a better understanding of the sort of thinking that can be found in the black community, which perhaps makes it easier for good boys to go bad. Houston, Texas. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee has been accused of abrasive behavior which has driven 5 of her black employees to resign. Former executive assistant, Negro Rhiannon Burris, said Lee chewed her out for not having a limo and chauffeur available to drive her to a reenactment of the Selma to Montgomery March. She screamed at Burris, "You don't understand. I am a queen, and I demand to be treated like a queen." Burris said that Rebecca Cox, a vice president for Continental Airlines, phoned her Washington office and said that Lee's behavior on flights had been extremely abrasive, adding, "We have been dealing with her behavior for 3 years now, and we're tired of having to put up with her. She demands deluxe perks and recently complained that we didn't serve seafood on one flight. She screamed at the top of her lungs for a minute and embarrassed the flight attendant and passengers in first class." Burris said that Lee is forever declaring to people in a brazen manner, "Don't you know who I am? I am Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee." Now, this is from The Truth at Last, issue number 406, page 8. Well, we feel that this sort of loss of perspective is common, and it also may be an indicator that within the black ruling elite, there is an awareness of being part of a larger movement which would include the malevolent forces in the white community, the Freemasonry, the Marxists, and so forth. We have noted how Marxists have worked in conjunction with black leaders in the past and have shown an intention to do this whenever it's possible to adjust to advance their interests. Well, thank you for tuning in. This is Celebration. My name is John Savers. That's all for today. I appreciate those of you who have tuned in, and hope you'll tune in for our next program. Until that time,